Welcome to the Writer's Way podcast, where stories come alive and creativity finds its voice. In this special live episode, our host Mia Thompson sits down with acclaimed author Stephen Hauge to explore the gripping world of his book, Dark Against the Sky, a climbing boy's story. Get ready to journey into a tale of courage, resilience, and the human spirit. This is Writer's Way podcast. Let's dive into the story together.
Morning, Steve.
Morning.
Mia Thompson. How are you doing today?
I am fine.
Okay, that's good to hear that. Just to set a proper expectation, this interview about your book, Dark Against the Sky, a climbing boy's story.
Yes.
So start with, what inspired you to write Dark Against the Sky?
Well, I was taking a course on British history my senior year in college, and we had the traditional term paper. And I decided to write on child labor, which at that period in British history was in the mines, the mills, or the chimneys. And no one seemed to have written about climbing boys, so I decided to write about climbing boys.
Okay. Now, were there any real historical events that influenced the story?
Well, perhaps, may I tell your listeners about why the need for climbing boys developed? Then I can answer your question more directly. London chimneys used to burn wood, but when wood became too expensive, homeowners switched to coal. But when coal burns, the imperfect combustion leaves carbon as soot on the flues, and if that's not cleaned out, then the chimney fire could burn down the whole house. And by 1848, which is about a decade after my book, 1/4 of the trade on the Thames River was coal, which is 3.5 million tons annually coming up the river, which produced 1.5 million bushels of soot, which had to be cleaned out and was eventually sold to farmers to kill insects and slugs. So one of the byproducts of the coal was the famous London fogs, where the condensed moisture from the Thames became a vapor saturated with particles of carbon, and even in the middle of the day, street lights had to be turned on, so to speak, and many deaths occurred. At that point in time, 1834, there were probably about 200 master sweeps and 500 apprentices, as the boys were called. The master sweeps fed them, lodged them, and clothed them, did their jobs, but they acquired the climbing boys by basically stealing them or kidnapping them or buying them from poor families or poor houses. And it was an incredibly challenging job. Not only was it frightening for a boy of 7, 8, 9 years old to go up this vertical darkness for 2 or 3 stories, but they developed inflammation of the eyelids. They had cough, sores, burns, stunted growth. They got chimney sweepers cancer. And of course, the smell of the coal forced them to be outcast. So they were always set apart from the rest of society. But, for the master sweeps, it was a worthwhile endeavor because a climbing boy received about 10 pence for cleaning a chimney and about another 5 pence worth of soot. And so if a boy cleaned 4 chimneys a day for 5-6 days a week, he could clear 45 pounds a year. And the master sweep used this, as I say, to pay for the housing, the food, the clothing, and the tools. So he did fairly well for himself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The story, you were talking about the 19th century London.
Yes.
The story sheds light on the harsh realities of child labor and
Yes.
highlights the need for justice and, reform in society,
Yes.
and encouraging readers to stand up against exploitation and unfair treatment. So
Yes.
it really matters, especially nowadays, like spreading this lesson fosters, awareness about past, present injustices, like inspiring action for human rights and fair treatment of all individuals. Now, aside from that, I'd like to know what message or themes do you hope readers take away from this book?
Well, before I answer that question, let me just build on the point you made. In 1773, it was the first pamphlet about climbing boys to protect them, but it took another 100 years. It was 1875, the final death of a climbing boy in a chimney. So the regulations that you talk about to improve the life of these lads progressed very, very slowly. And if you go to my website, darkagainstthesky.com, I have a chart there which shows the regulations and the pamphlets that were done to try to support them throughout that century that it took to get them done. So the theme, what do I want someone to take away from the book? Well, I think there are a number of points. One is the whole nature of historical fiction. I think what it does is it enables readers to experience events in a different time frame and location of their own. And I think that educates readers about that, which they would not otherwise have. Of course, it's important that you do the right research to get the details so you have credibility and you're authentic to the period. But in terms of the themes of the book, I would say it's a coming-of-age story for Tommy. I mean, he starts as a follower and becomes a leader. He shows resilience of the human spirit, tremendous fortitude in facing the challenges that he has, and in his search for family, I think that's the driving force that gets him to achieve what he does. He's been stolen from his family, and so he desperately wants to get back, and to recover that relationship is what drives his behavior.
Okay. And I can see it, from the what you're talking about, the character of Tommy in the story, like perseverance and ambition, even in the toughest circumstances. Now,
yes.
Climbing Boys played a central role in the story. Now, can you tell us about their history, like why they came about and how did their jobs and what their lives were like?
Well, I think I've already covered that up front. They came about because of the change in the fuel that was burned in the fireplaces. It used to be wood, and it shifted to coal. So to prevent houses from burning down, the chimneys had to be cleaned, so to speak. And because the first machine to build, to clean a chimney was only developed in 1803, the boys were sent up the chimneys, small boys, obviously, because only small boys could fit. Chimneys, supposedly the old-fashioned chimneys were only 12 inches by 14 inches, which I think is a bit of an understatement, but obviously the more narrow the flue, the better the draw for the chimney, so they weren't very large, and so only small lads could go up there, and that's why Climbing Boys developed. And then over time, people began to realize the impact it was having on the children, basically destroying their future, let alone their bodies, and so changes were made.
Okay. Now, the next question is, can you tell us more about the protagonist and his journey?
Yes. Tommy starts off basically as just a typical London boy, but then he's stolen in a park from his parents, and he wakes up the next day in a cellar room and is instructed on how to become a climbing boy. Kelly is the master sweep who's done this. He needs boys, obviously, to make the money to keep him in the lifestyle he likes. And so Tommy goes up the chimneys because he doesn't know at the age that he is of 8 where his parents are, how to get back to them. So it's only by connecting with cobblers, because his father's a cobbler, that he's able to begin to appreciate where his father is. He eventually finds his father in the book, and then he decides he needs to rescue his father from where his father is.
Okay. Now, how do you balance historical accuracy with creating a compelling narrative?
Well, that's a good question. I happen to love historical fiction because, as I mentioned before, the residual benefit of reading of historical fiction is that you have gone to a different time and place, and now you have new knowledge about history that perhaps you didn't have before. So it's not just the plot. Once the story ends, you still have the benefit of what you now know about a different time and place. And to get that, obviously, you have to do some research. And I lived in New York City, so I had the New York Public Library, which has an absolutely splendid collection of historical documents and books. One book, for example, was only one of 3 in the entire world. The other one was in Washington, D.C. and Moscow. And then I did further research on the ground, so to speak, in London by actually walking the paths that Tommy might have done more than a century earlier. It's important to get the research. I was lucky that there was a gentleman named Henry Mayhew who in 1851 put out a 4-volume ethnographic study of what he called the London labor and the London poor, and he's got 40 pages in there just on chimney sweeps and climbing boys. So I was able to get some data and some specifics, and even he had interviewed some of them, so I was able to use some of the appropriate language. Important to be authentic to the period, both in terms of language and detail.
Okay. Steve, I'd like to know, what was the most challenging part of writing his character?
Well, that's a good question, because you have to have an interesting story on top of the historical context in which the story appears. So all the research that you have to do, which is rather voluminous, has to somehow be buried behind the story, so it doesn't look as though this is a history book, but more of a history story. And then you have to create a compelling story about the major character, the protagonist, and the people he interacts with. In his case, he has a band of brothers, the other climbing boys in his group, as well as other climbing boys in the street, as well as other street folks, so to speak, in London at the time. So what you have to do is to create a universe that is sufficiently captivating for a reader that the reader turns the next page, so to speak. Yeah, because if you don't create something, kids are much like very older readers. If the book bores them, they just put it down and go away. So you have to have something, especially with this book is meant for middle grade readers, and therefore, again, who are just slightly older than Tommy himself. And so you have to have a reason for them to keep moving through it. And so it is very event-driven. There's a lot of action. There are not a lot of people sitting and talking for long periods of time. There are necessary moments for that where you get different people's perspective on things. But in general, there's just a lot of action in the book, and that motivates it. And then it builds up to the climax in a courtroom.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, did any character surprise you as you wrote the story?
Well, I don't know about surprise, because I think in general, when you create a character, the character has certain traits or attributes, and the person will be consistent with those. Otherwise, it's unfair to the reader, let alone the character. Tim is what I would call one of the hard-bitten characters. He's one of Tommy's band of brothers, and usually he's a bit of a loner because he's had a terrible life, which he talks about in the story once when they talk about around the fire one night. But he does Tommy a good turn later in the book, and I think the reader is very happy to see that Tim has that quality in him. And of course, the two cobblers, who are in the same profession as Tommy's dad, also step forward at the very end in perhaps the most emotional moment in the book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I know, from the story, because I have studied yearbook as well, and the climbing boys, they support each other through hardships and demonstrating the strength found in, trust, loyalty, and companionship. In a world, you have mentioned the loneliness, in a world where loneliness and isolation are growing concerns, especially in this generations right now.
Yeah.
So this lesson, it would reinforce the importance of building and maintaining strong, supportive relationships. So, aside from that, were there any scenes that were particularly emotional or difficult to write?
I think it's emotional when you structure a book toward the climax, because the climax should be emotional. It should be a moment where the reader is affected emotionally as to what has occurred. And I hope that does occur in the courtroom scene at the very end where, I don't want to give the plot away, but there's a scene with Tommy's father where he finally realizes who he is, because he's been hit on the head in a fire by a falling beam, and his memory is rather weak. And at that moment, he recovers and finally understands who he is and what he can do. And I think it's quite an emotional scene. Mm-hmm. I've also written a sequel to this called Dark Against the Sky, Sweeping the Shadows. And in that book, one of the characters dies, and that's an emotional scene as well.
Okay. Now, I'd like to know, how have your readers responded to this book so far? Have you received any memorable feedback from your readers?
Well, I have in a way. An organization called Goodreads, which is on the web, which supports literature in a wonderful way, and people write reviews to that. And so I have a number of people who have written reviews about my book on that site, and they've been quite complimentary, which is good. You're certainly welcome to go look at them. there are very few people who actually write authors, primarily because they don't know where the author lives. They'd have to write the author through the publisher and all that. It gets rather torturous. But but many of the people who seem to have read the book loved the portrait of London in 1834. They just weren't aware that that's what street life was like. And they were unaware that this is what climbing boys had to go through. And this was the challenge and the terror that climbing boys would have facing those chimneys, especially when they got stuck, as they frequently did. I mean, there were a number of deaths of climbing boys in the chimneys. Either they came down by the wrong flue and got stuck, or they got stuck in a horizontal flue and inhaled too much soot, or the master sweep would light a fire under them to encourage them to go, and then they got stuck in the fire, they would die. I mean, I imagine it'd be terrifying for the typical reader who's, say, a middle grade student to conceive of him or herself going up that chimney and then having to do the job they have to do. Because you got to go up, and then, of course, you have to come all the way down. So you got to be careful. Because people sometimes, there's a scene, for example, in the book where a maid unwittingly put some water on the hob, so to speak, and the sides of the chimney become so slick that one of the characters slips and slides down and has a major injury due to that. So there were always problems these kids had to face.
Mm-hmm. Now, thank you so much for that. Steve, Tommy Simpson will likely become, a young hero to young children as well.
Yeah.
Now, what do you hope young readers will learn from this story?
Well, I hope they learn a number of things. Number one, of course, the whole historical picture of what life was like as a climbing boy, so they're empathetic to that. But number two, just if they could come somewhat like Tommy, in other words, start as a follower and become a leader, find a why, which is finding his father, and then he develops the how of the rescue of his father, so that it's a great motivating force. Most people in life tend to be followers, and I think it's a real challenge for people to step forward and actually lead. And so I think the fortitude, the resilience, and the leadership are basically what Tommy demonstrates. And I think those are all good elements.
Okay. Now, how does Dark Against High stand out from other historical fiction novels?
That's a good question. No one, to my knowledge, once I started to write the book and do further research, had really written about climbing boys. There's a moment in Oliver Twist, which just came out a few years after my book is set, 1834, where Oliver is almost apprenticed to a climb master sweep, but that doesn't happen. And then Charles Kingsley wrote a famous story called The Water Babies, where one of the characters is a climbing boy, and he comes down the wrong flue, and he comes into a bedroom and goes into a bed and sleeps there, and then goes off to other adventures. But in general, climbing boys were not written about. And so this is the first book that I know of this length that really focuses on the life of a climbing boy. And so if this is what you want to learn about in terms of, particularly if you're interested in child labor, or even if you're not, it's the first book or set of books, because there is a sequel, that would educate kids about the climbing boy experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, if the book were adapted into a movie, who would you cast as the main character?
Well, that's a good question, because I actually have written a screenplay, and I'm trying to make this into a movie. I'm talking with a number of studios now, but because I do think the book is highly cinematic, because it's highly visual, and London at that point. It would be brilliant as a black and white film, but today, of course, people won't see black and white films, so it has to be in color. But the black and white, of course, should emphasize the coal even more, which makes it more appropriate and tonal. But I don't know. You'd have to have a child actor who's quite appealing in terms of his ability to carry the main role. I haven't thought of who that would be. Obviously, it would be remarkable if you could get an 8 or 9-year-old to do this. There are such people who seem to be found every so often in the film business, but I don't know them personally, so I haven't thought of specific ones. But I think, again, it's set in London, and the Brits do these things tremendously well. I mean, it would be perfect for, say, a BBC production or something like that, because they would have both the mise en scène, so to speak, as well as a whole stable of actors who could play all these other roles.
Okay. Now, aside from the sequel that you mentioned, I would like to know if the sequel that you write is available on Amazon, or
yes,
was it?
It is. Okay. It is. Again, the first book is called Dark Against the Sky, a climbing boy story, and the sequel is Dark Against the Sky, Sweeping the Shadows. They're both available on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles or places like that.
Okay. Now, do you have any upcoming projects or books in the works?
Well, no. I am, as I mentioned, I've written the screenplay, and I'm hoping to get a film version of this. Because if I can get a film made, particularly of the first book, then if that does well, the second book would be an obvious sequel. Then you can sell the books on the back of that, and I think it would do very well. I didn't write the book to make money. I wrote the book because I was a teacher for 12 years, and sort of an English history double major in college. My interest has always been combining English and history, which in historical fiction works. And if I can get kids to read the book, so much the better. And even more so, if I can get the kids to write their own historical fiction, I think they would begin to appreciate what this book has enabled them to do.
Okay. Now, one last question. Now, how can readers stay connected with you and your future work, which is, you're talking about the screenplay?
Yeah. Well, there is the website, again, darkagainstthesky.com, which has a tremendous amount of information on it. It's got 3 trailers on it. It's got history of the period. It's got 3 books that it recommends that you read if you're interested in climbing boys and the period. It's got a series of reviews and all that. So if I can make a film, if I can sell more books, I will probably expand the website into more interactive. So as people read, they can go to the website and offer opinions and whatever. And to the degree that I can respond, I will do that.
Okay. Now, well, thank you so much for participating in this recorded interview, Steve. Now, from your answers, the Dark Against the Sky stories, it carries, a powerful message for resilience, friendship, and the fight for justice. And this story not only brings to life struggles of chimney wood sweeps in 19th century London, but also resonate with modern audiences facing adversity. And by sharing Tommy's journey with a wider audience through social media, like book talks, with educators, you can inspire readers to reflect on history's lesson while, fostering empathy and courage. And your book, it has the potential to spark important conversations about perseverance and hope, making it a story worth spreading far and wide. So keep shining a light on this incredible tale. Okay? Well, thank you so much again for participating in this interview, Steve. So I will just keep you posted, send you an email, and I'll be waiting for your response, okay?
That sounds excellent. Thank you so much, Mia.
All right, you're welcome. Have a good one. Take care.
Okay. Yeah,
All
bye-bye.
Right, bye-bye.